Good afternoon and welcome to the Nerves Podcast. I'm Bats. It's actually early morning for me as I'm recording this. I have my hot coffee here. And we are going to be reading through Anti-Gorgias issue number 3 and 4. And if you recall, the reason why I stopped reading after issue number 2 is that issue number 3 is a Q&A. And it is, of course, in Mr. Sinclair fashion, very, very unorthodox. So I will be reading the questions and numbering them, and then reading the answers given for each one. Stay tuned to the end of the video because we are giving away over $100 worth of games from spearwitch.com, which is the website that Jared runs. It is a shop full of a bunch of different artful tabletop role-playing games and supplements and adventures. And I went and bought, like I said, about $100 worth of games, and we are going to get those shipped to one lucky person who is watching this video. But stay tuned, because at the end of the video, I will let you know how to enter. But let's jump into Anti-Gorgias issue 3. Subtitle, in which your questions are finally answered. Question 1. Wait, what? Why? Science is an essentially anarchic enterprise. Theoretical anarchism is more humanitarian and more likely to encourage progress than its law and order alternatives. Question 2. Cui bono? This is shown both by an examination of historical episodes and by an abstract analysis of the relation between idea and action. The only principle that does not inhibit progress is anything goes. Question number 3. How does one do the Charlie Brown? For example, we may use hypotheses that contradict well-confirmed theories and or well-established experimental results. We may advance science by proceeding counter-inductively. Question 4. If you could take two completely different game systems and somehow smash them together, what would they be? And what would the result look like? The consistency condition, which demands that new hypotheses agree with accepted theories, is unreasonable because it preserves the older theory and not the better theory. Hypotheses contradicting well-confirmed theories give us evidence that cannot be obtained in any other way. Proliferation of theories is beneficial for science, while uniformity impairs its critical power. Uniformity also endangers the free development of the individual. Question number 5. Who will make God bleed and what will be left of them? There is no idea, however ancient and absurd, that is not capable of improving our knowledge. The whole history of thought is absorbed into science and is used for improving every single theory. Nor is political interference rejected. It may be needed to overcome the chauvinism of science that resists alternatives to the status quo. Question number 6. If we dissolve the grid, what do we gain? No theory ever agrees with all the facts in its domain, yet it is not always the theory that is to blame. Facts are constituted by older ideologies, and a clash between facts and theories may be proof of progress. It is also a first step in our attempt to find the principles implicit in familiar observational notions. Question number 7. A child at a summer camp I was working at once asked, "How do the sun be so hot if it have no heat?" As an example of such an attempt, I examined the tower argument, which the Aristotelians used to refute the motion of the earth. The argument involves natural interpretations. ideas so closely connected with observations that it needs a special effort to realize their existence and to determine their content. Galileo identifies the natural interpretations which are inconsistent with Copernicus and replaces them by others. Question number 8. Does size matter? Interpret that however you want. The new natural interpretations constitute a new and highly abstract observation language. They are introduced and concealed so that one foils to notice the change that has taken place. They contain the idea of the relativity of all motion and the law of circular inertia. Question number 9. Cut your grilled cheeses into triangles or rectangles? In addition to natural interpretations, Galileo also changes sensations that seem to endanger Copernicus. He admits that there are such sensations. He praises Copernicus for having disregarded them. He claims to have removed them with the help of the telescope. However, he offers no theoretical reasons why the telescope should be expected to give a true picture of the sky. Question number 10. So you're the manager on the team, right? So you ought to know the players' names, so I'm asking you, who's on first? Son of a bitch. Nor does the initial experience with the telescope provide such reasons. The first telescopic observations of the sky are indistinct, indeterminate, contradictory, and in conflict with what everyone can see with its unaided eyes. And the only theory that could have helped to separate telescopic illusions from vertical phenomena was refuted by simple tests. Question number 11. Why do crayons? On the other hand, there are some telescopic phenomena which are plainly Copernican. Galileo introduces these phenomena as independent evidence for Copernicus, while the situation is rather that one refuted view, Copernicanism, has a certain similarity with phenomena emerging from another refuted view, the idea that the telescopic phenomena are faithful images of the sky. Question number 12. How much money do I need before I've bought away the consequences of my sin? Such irrational methods of support are needed because of the uneven development, Marx Lenin, of different parts of science. Copernicanism and other essential ingredients of modern science survived only because reason was frequently overruled in their past. Question number 13. Would you rather buy every magic card in existence, in parentheses, you figure out how to get the money, or eat every magic card in existence in a single sitting? Galileo's method works in other fields as well. For example, it can be used to eliminate the existing arguments against materialism and to put an end to the philosophical mind-body problem. The corresponding scientific problems remain untouched, however. It does not follow that it should be universally applied. Question number 14. Who's the most overrated Greek hero? The Church at the time of Galileo not only kept closer to reason as defined then, and in part even now, it also considered the ethical and social consequences of Galileo's views. Its indictment of Galileo was rational, and only opportunism and a lack of perspective can demand a revision. Question number 15. At what point is a dice pool too large a pool? Galileo's inquiries formed only a small part of the so-called Copernican revolution. Adding the remaining elements makes it still more difficult to reconcile the development with familiar principles of theory evaluation. Question number 16. Why do people die when they're killed? The results obtained so far suggest abolishing the distinction between a context of discovery and a context of justification, norms, and facts, observational terms and theoretical terms. None of these distinctions plays a role in scientific practice. Attempts to enforce them would have disastrous consequences. Popper's critical rationalism fails for the same reason. Question number 17. Isn't a game an expression of the designer's innermost self? Finally, the kind of comparison that underlies most methodologies is possible only in some rather simple cases. It breaks down when we try to compare non-scientific views with science, and when we consider the most advanced, most general, and therefore most mythological parts of science itself. Question number 18. Isn't a game an expression of the designer's innermost self? Neither science nor rationality are universal measures of excellence. They are particular traditions, unaware of their historical grounding. Question number 19. Isn't a game an expression of the designer's innermost self? Yet it is possible to evaluate standards of rationality and to improve them. The principles of improvement are neither above tradition nor beyond change, and it is impossible to nail them down. Question number 20. Isn't a game an expression of the designer's innermost self? Science is neither a single tradition nor the best tradition there is, except for people who have become accustomed to its presence, its benefits, and its disadvantages. In a democracy, it should be separated from the state, just as churches are now separated from the state. July 2020. So that's Anti-Gorgias number 3, in which your questions are finally answered. And I have to say, none of my questions are answered. But I understand what this is trying to say. If you replace science with, like, Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, you would possibly get the feeling that this conversation, if you want to call it that, is trying to say that we must question the current state of things, that we must use, as it says at the very beginning, anarchism in a game design way to progress, that to have something be, the end-all be-all, to be the most popular game, to be the center of attention, is a limit to progress, and that we must actively work against it to grow. Which I agree with. I wrote something a while back, I think in March, called Molotov, that talked about Wizards of the Coast basically being an act of violence. Not physical violence, but still violence, because of their chokehold they are trying to have on the industry. So I have a lot of opinions on that. I'm not really sure if this is the time to go into them. This is supposed to be a read-through. But, yeah, that was very interesting. I definitely liked the juxtaposition of the questions with the material itself. I feel like, in a way, it was an example of what the material was trying to say. Because after basically every paragraph, you are forced to reconcile with what exactly you're doing, which is reading these mostly ridiculous questions. And then moving on to learn about quote-unquote science and, how the scientific methods of different people are refuted because of basically acts of rebellion, and that they are only considered, scientific, methods at that time because of the beliefs of that time. And so the only way to to grow is to challenge those beliefs, to see things from a different light. Otherwise, you were just kind of looking down the same barrel at the same bullet. Before we move on to Anti-Gorgias 4, which I haven't opened yet, so I'm not sure exactly what's in there, let me remind you that you should stay tuned to the end of the video, where we are going to be telling you how to enter for the chance to win $100 worth of games from spearwitch.com. These are going to be physical copies of games. They will be shipped to you from spearwitch.com's mysterious laboratory up in the mountains of Norway. I don't even know if there's mountains in Norway. I don't know what I'm saying. But yes, $100 worth of physical games. They're all new to the store, adventures, games, supplements, things of that nature. So, like I said, stay tuned. But until then, let's jump into Anti-Gorgias 4. This first editorial is by Emmanuel Levinas, maybe. Levinas or Levinas. Emmanuel Levinas, August 2020. If transcendence has meaning, it can only signify the fact that the event of being, the essence, passes over to what is other than being. But what is being's other? Among the 5 genera of the sophists, a genus opposed to being is lacking, even though, since the Republic, there had been question of what is beyond essence. And what can the fact of passing over mean here, where the passing over, ending at being's other, can only undo its fasticity during such a passage? Transcendence is passing over to being's other, otherwise than being. Not to be otherwise, but otherwise than being. And not to not be. Passing over is not here equivalent to dying. Being and not being illuminate one another and unfold a speculative dialect, which is a determination of being. Or else the negativity which attempts to repel being is immediately submerged by being. The void that hollows out is immediately filled with the mute and anonymous rustling of the there is, as the place left vacant by one who died is filled with the murmur of the attendants. Being's essence dominates not being itself. My death is insignificant, unless I drag into my death the totality of being, as Macbeth wished, at the hour of his last combat. But then moral being, or life, would be insignificant and ridiculous, even in the irony with regard to oneself, to which it could, in fact, be likened. To be or not to be is not the question where transcendence is concerned. The statement of being's other, of the otherwise than being, claims to state a difference over and beyond that which separates being from nothingness. The very difference of the beyond, the difference of transcendence. But one immediately wonders if in the formula otherwise than being, the adverb otherwise does not inevitably refer to the verb to be, which simply has been avoided by an artificially elliptical turn of phrase. Then what is signified by the verb to be would be inelucidative in everything said, thought, and felt. Our languages woven about the verb to be would not only reflect this undethronable royalty, stronger than that of the gods, they would be the very purple of this royalty. But then, no transcendence other than the factitious transcendence of worlds behind the scenes, of the heavenly city gravitating in the skies over the terrestrial city, would have meaning. The being of beings and of worlds, however different among themselves they may be, weaves among incomparables a common fate. It puts them in conjunction, even if the unity of being that assembles them is but an analogical unity. Every attempt to disjoin the conjunction and the conjuncture but emphasizes them. The there is fills the void left by the negation of being. Emmanuel Levinas, August 2020. That was a tongue twister. I have to say that much. Whenever I read something like this, since it is philosophy, I always get the feeling that it's not really talking about what it's talking about, if that makes sense. I don't know the context. On the surface, it definitely looks like he's talking about almost like disproving life after death sort of thing, or that there is, just talking about, death, saying that it's meaningless if there is nothing after, and trying to figure out what that is, what is after, and doing so in a very particular, fashion, being very focused on the wording. Only towards the end does he actually mention anything about, God or heaven. And it's less of a question of do they exist as it is like if this is your version of, the afterlife, it has to be this. It almost sounds like he's saying it's a little ridiculous. And at the end he says, there is fills the void left by the negation of being. I think in a way, what Emmanuel Levinas is doing is giving an example of the meaning of life, the meaning of death, and it is to question, he says there is fills the void, and there is only happens by the people who are there afterwards. So somebody passes away and their loved ones fill that void with, there is such. I feel like it's really deep. I feel like it's basically saying, you are who talks about you after you die, kind of. And sort of hiding it in this, like, who are you when you die? What is the opposite of being? Yeah, people like this, they like to use a lot of fancy words to say something really simple, I feel like, which isn't a bad thing. I feel like, especially in this case, it, like I mentioned, it's an example of what it's talking about itself. This sort of thing, this sort of wondering what is there, is all there is, That's what's important. But not even important, but that's all that we can really confirm. That is the afterlife, is that wondering what comes after. Now, I could be entirely wrong about that too. Like I said, it was quite the tongue twister as I read it, but that's how I feel about it, and I'm fascinated by how I feel about it, because I think about death a lot. Not on purpose most of the time. It's my anxiety that kind of does it. But I don't know. There was this passage I read a long time ago, like in high school, and it's kind of stuck with me. It was about the samurai, and it said that the samurai would meditate every morning, but they wouldn't meditate like to clear their mind and think about, and find inner peace. They would clear their mind, or they would meditate and think about all the different ways they could die. Because to be a samurai meant that you were already dead. Basically, that's what the idea is, that you were supposed to already be dead. And so every morning you would think about all the various ways that you could die, so that when that time came, you would be prepared. And I think about that a lot. It really speaks to how I experience anxiety, which seems to only get worse as, the years go by. But, it makes you think about a lot of things that you probably don't want to think about. And I say think, it makes you think, but really it just makes you worry. It makes you worry about things that probably aren't real, that aren't going to happen. But you worry about them anyways. And I always think about that, just sitting there and meditating on the thought of death, of being dead already, of the different ways you could die. This is a little morbid. I don't want anybody, if this is making you sad or depressed, you feel free to stop watching, because I'm not trying to explore this in a negative way. I just think it's interesting, the connection between the two, that you're sort of practicing the art of not existing by doing that, you know? But yeah, that's only the first editorial. We've got one more to go. This one is by Jared Sinclair, 1950. Origin here means that from and by which something is what it is and as it is. What something is, as it is, we call its essence or nature. The origin of something is the source of its nature. The question concerning the origin of the work of arts asks about the source of its nature. What art is should be inferable from the work. What the work of art is, we can come to know only from the nature of art. Anyone can easily see that we are moving in a circle. Ordinary understanding demands that this circle be avoided because it violates logic. What art is can be gathered from a comparative examination of actual artworks. But how are we to be certain that we are indeed basing such an examination on artworks if we do not know beforehand what art is? Thus, we are compelled to follow the circle. This is neither a makeshift nor a defect. To enter upon this path is the strength of thought. To continue on is the feast of thought, assuming that thinking is a craft. Not only is the main step from work to art a circle, like the step from art to work, but every separate step that we attempt circles in this circle. Jared Sinclair, 1950. It feels straightforward that you must examine art to understand where art comes from, and you must understand where art comes from to examine art. To me, that just sounds like the process of like learning things, questioning. You know, you see a piece of art, you ask where did it come from, who made it, and that informs your art moving forward. I always try to, whenever I read something like this, something from like a philosopher or a thinker, I try to boil it down to as simple as possible, because a lot of times, and again, like I said, this is just me, but a lot of times things like this can fly right over my head, when in reality they are a lot more simple than what the writer is trying to say, or what the writer actually wrote. And part of me gets it, that's like part of the art form of this sort of work. You know, if it was straightforward, it would just be like on a fortune cookie, and you would just read it and you would move on. But for it to be in this form that it is now, makes you have to think about it, which is the point of this editorial, I believe. So like, I'm not trying to criticize the art form. I just know that my personal way to dig into this stuff is to try to strip away all the fat and find, are you trying to say anything, first of all? Are you trying to say anything? 2, should you be trying to say anything? And 3, is what you're saying something that I can understand? I don't really care if I agree or disagree. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about, you know, the work. It's just about thinking. But to those terms, I definitely think Anti-Gorgias has something to say. I know I've spoken to Jared before, just as a disclaimer, I guess. You know, I've spoken to Jared, and I know that I know the process by which he writes, which is very similar to the one that I write. It's very much a discovery. I know that a lot of these works were taken, to put it nicely. They were borrowed from other philosophers and then placed into the context of Anti-Gorgias, which is a gaming zine. And in that way, I think they too are an exploration of the meaning of games. I think maybe not even necessarily the meaning of games, but an exploration of ideas in regards to games. And I think here at the end, because this is the end, I do not think there is another Anti-Gorgias. I don't know if there ever will be. At the end, Jared seems to be not necessarily questioning, but coming to grips with what Anti-Gorgias itself was doing. You know, Anti-Gorgias is another step in the cycle between, looking at art and creating art. Anti-Gorgias is somewhere in the middle. It occupies a lot of different spaces on the circle. But it feels like a fitting goodbye. Almost like, hey, you stopped, between the 2 points of the circle. You read this. Now it's time to keep going. Overall, I think Anti-Gorgias is something that the tabletop role-playing space needs. Think pieces like this have existed for film for a long time, for music for a long time. They are now beginning to exist in video games. The rise of video essays alone kind of show that, but also there are massive works. I believe it's a PhD thesis, but there is a massive thing like this. I don't know what to really call it. Analysis. Think piece about Metal Gear Solid 2. And like I said, it's massive. It takes up like a whole website. I think it's like 100 pages. But yeah, this sort of work being done in tabletop role-playing games is necessary and is part of the reason why Nerves, both the podcast, the website, all of that stuff exists, is to do stuff like this, is to push forward with the analysis and critique and perspective-driven introspection that exists in other media. It's time we start thinking about this stuff seriously, because it's going to influence what comes next. I also think it's important when it comes to games that the creation of art is still important as well. And there are a lot of people who are pushing things like that forward, like Jared writing Anti-Gorgias, like Jay Dragon writing a big bulk of lyric games that have inspired a lot of people already. There's a lot of work being done in the scene. I think it's time that we give it the respect it deserves, take a step back and examine it, and start talking about it with an air of authority, start talking about it just in a more serious way. Yes, they are games, but a movie is just a movie. And yet, you could write hundreds of pages about a movie that means something to you. Here at the Nerves podcast and at Nerves in general, that is our goal. We want to find the games and the people who feel that way about games. So if you have a game that you feel like that about, that you feel like you could write thousands of words on, reach out to us in the email in the description, or go to the website, projectnerves.com, and check out the Nerves page. We're working on the first scene. It's going to be heading to Kickstarter at the beginning of December. We will have more information on that soon. So please follow us on Twitter, keep an eye out, all that stuff. But before we go, we promised to give away over $100 of games from the Spear Witch store. You can see the list of it on the screen now, or the pictures. I'm not sure how I'm going to edit this together yet. But you could win all these games, and it's really simple. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel. It's that simple. That's all you gotta do. You just gotta subscribe. You've watched this far. Subscribe. You probably like this kind of content if you're here to begin with, especially on an Anti-Gorgias read-through. But subscribe. I will put all the subscribers into a list, a randomizer, and pick one lucky person to be getting this care package, I guess we could call it, of $100 of games, supplements, and adventures from spearwitch.com. So if you're interested in any of these games, or just want to support the channel, or just want to win some stuff, subscribe, and yeah, we will reach out to you when the time comes. We will hopefully have a winner next week. We'll leave the video up for a while to let people kind of filter in, and then we will declare a winner next week. But until then, that's been Anti-Gorgias issue 3 and 4. Until next time, good luck. Don't die.